Hi guys, I'm Bex.
And I'm Grace.
And we're the Packer Sisters.
Tune in each week as we process through everyday topics and personal experiences. Welcome to a very special episode today of my GeneSIS. Last week we talked a little bit more about WTF, which is a pseudonym for a church that we attended for a while with our family. And we got some stories from me. We had some stories from Bex. But today we're actually going to wrap up kind of this series on spiritual abuse with a final episode by bringing in a special guest, our mother.
But she has a lot of experience to bring to the table and a completely new perspective that we thought would be beneficial to our listeners. Not only did we attend this church, like you know, but there was a school attached, and our mom taught at the school. So it'll be interesting to hear her side of being a teacher, but also just attending the church.
And also a parent of two young adults at the time who were both also very deeply involved.
Yeah, so without further ado, here's our mother. So say hello.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us today, Mom. And by the way, her first name is Kelly, so
no, we all just call
just
her
Mom.
We all just
Mom
call her
for the
Mom.
sake of the episode.
A lot of people call me Mama Packer.
That's right.
Yeah.
A lot of our friends have called her that. It's great. But just so you know a little about our mom, we have a couple quirky questions to ask her. So just so our audience gets a better feel for who you are, what's your favorite color?
My favorite color is Kelly green.
That's perfect.
Imagine that.
Of course. Of course.
So what's your dream vacation if you could just do anything? No money, like don't worry about that. Don't worry about travel, just if you could do anything.
I think my dream vacation would be on a sunny beach somewhere, the smell of the ocean, and if it's warm and salty air, it's just a bonus.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's your favorite food to eat on a Saturday morning?
Homemade scones.
I was thinking you would say oatmeal.
Oat?
No.
I was expecting oatmeal.
Homemade scones. You know, I'll usually get up early and I'm gluten-free, just like you girls, and I will make some delicious homemade almond gluten-free scones, and I just love them right out of the oven.
Honestly, they are the best scones. Especially with lemon curd, a little strawberry jam, lemon curd, and some clotted cream. As they say. Clotted cream. Yum.
Sure. So we'll just go ahead and get started. So Mom, can you tell us a little bit about how you first really got involved at WTF?
When, your dad and I are looking at, what church to go to, it's not really what we want. We wanted it to be something that would fit the entire family. And if you remember, we had tried out several churches, especially in our vicinity, that did not have any kind of programs for kids. They just were not there. And I'm not calling you guys kids, but you were young women who, when you want friends or whatnot. So, that was first and foremost a big decision for whatever church that we would find. And I heard your podcast earlier about the doing the dinner, because I was there with you guys at the dinner, and I remember who told us, you might want to try out WTF. And so really, when somebody recommends a place to you, that gives you a better feeling about a place to go, because it means that somebody is actually endorsing it, and the person that suggested it was somebody that I trusted too. And when I'm thinking back on that, I realize that when you're involved in something like WTF and you're in over your head, you can't see. So anyway, we wound up going to WTF, and that very first Sunday that we were there, they enveloped you, Grace, right away. There were girls there that were your age, and that was really astounding. And there were even people there Becca's age, but Becca was less reticent at the time to get involved. So we were kind of using the litmus test of friendliness. You know, does this church reach out? We kind of felt like this was a place that we should continue, especially for you kids. On the side, here were Daddy and I, after that first time that we'd been there, just after one time, we would be at home going, it just kind of feels a little weird. And the word that we used for each other, it reminded me of Stepford Wives, that sense that everybody had to be perfect and that everybody was perfect. But you were like, okay, but you know it can't be that perfect. I thought about this again and again. I just think we continued because who would ever believe the depth of abuse was going on that really was? And here's what I want listeners to hear. You don't ever walk into a place thinking this place is going to abuse me, or that it's abusing other people. And it takes quite a long time to get into a position of actually seeing it.
I know that you had mentioned that there was kind of this weird, like, dictatorship almost. Like, do you have any certain examples of that? Because I know there were definitely times where we're just like, what the heck?
Well, okay, so very good example here. Grace touched on it a little bit, but I want to tell you about it from a parent perspective. Probably about the second week, third week in, they started talking to Daddy and I about having a discipler. And we were like, what is a discipler? And, you know, most people don't know Daddy and I, but it had to be somebody from their hierarchy of people that you were reporting to. And as we got into that, it was this type of reporting that is not normal. You were to go to these people, meet with them once a week. You were to tell them about your likes, your dislikes, your sins, everything. And what I didn't realize is that they, who were being discipled by the pastor or whoever, they were telling anything that you said. It was not a secret. It all went up to the top, and I know that things were held against people, or things would come down to me and being said to me that I had thought I'd said in confidence to my discipler. And it was like, wait a second. You know what? If somebody comes to me, you come to me, I am telling you, I will keep your confidence. So that type of abuse of power, right at the very beginning, it sounded good, but in theory, it was another form of manipulation and control.
Yeah, and I know that not just the adults, like, your age need it, because I remember Grace had to have one in her program. I had to get one too. They, like, forced me to.
I remember having one.
Yeah, I saw this really wonderful artsy woman that I really looked up to. And like, she was actually awesome. And I trusted her a lot because she wasn't like everyone else in that way. But I know that I probably made her feel awkward because she wasn't part of the actual leadership. And I had asked her to do that for me because I just really looked up to her and I didn't want to be with anyone else. And I remember when I asked her, will you be my like discipler? She kind of looked at me funny. It's like, me? Like, okay.
Right. There was also this sense that there were certain disciplers. I'm like thinking, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. I mean, if I came to you, Grace, I mean, you and I could sharpen each other. You and I could sharpen each other, Becca, or, different friends at different points in our lives. But to choose one and to have to choose from such a limited pool of people, it couldn't have been anybody outside the church. Oh, no. It had to be somebody there. And if you had said, oh, well, I'm already being discipled, they would want to know who it was.
Yeah.
I was kind of I kind of had a mentor naturally in the elder sister of a friend that I had made there.
Yes, you did.
And when I entered into the Master's Commission program, I told them I already have a discipler, I already have a mentor, and they were like, no, you need to have somebody we pick out for you.
Right.
Even though she actually was really involved too. I mean, she was a youth leader. She was pretty involved at the church. Her family had been there forever. But they felt like they needed to give me somebody who was really involved with the program, which then kind of listening to you, Mom, it makes me realize something that hadn't occurred to me. But the reason they had us be discipled by those interns in the program is because then they would come back and probably talk about all of our stuff.
Yes. We felt like then, okay, if we need to choose a discipler, we asked a couple that very well. They were a pastor or associate pastor in the church. I don't know if associate, but Daddy told me that he continually asked him again and again and again, are you tithing? Are you tithing on your gross or your net? But it was asked multiple times. So, I mean, that was another little tweak, that
horrendous. That is horrendous.
Yes.
I had no idea.
Me either. Oh my goodness.
Well, I know we're going to talk a little bit more, but I just want people in the end to know that money was a huge thing for this church. And
sure.
Yeah.
And what you don't realize is that greed actually toppled everything.
So kind of continuing off of the whole idea of leadership in the church and the top-down model they were using, I remember the pastors, or really the main pastor, while he was preaching, would preach from books he's written. And he would require families to read his books. And I'm wondering, Mom, if you can remember anything at all about that, or just how it felt hearing someone preach their own stuff like that.
Well, here's the thing. I remember, after the first couple of weeks when they realized, and they really surrounded us. And it felt good at the time. It did. It felt like people cared and like, oh my gosh, here was a real family, and why we'd never gotten this from any other church. And so we get this list of books that we are required to read as a family, or even just as adults. And it is lengthy. I'm talking like 15 books. And you start to look down the list and you're like, well, I can't get any of these books from the library. They're all books that the pastor has written. And oh, by the way, you need to buy all these books to read.
Yeah.
And that was like, what? And I'm ashamed to say that, we bought a couple of them, but but we were doing as we were told.
And that's okay.
I know, but we were doing as we were told. So, there we were.
Well, there was also this fear that if you didn't like if you weren't like everyone else and you stood out, that someone would approach you and kind of talk to you about that. Because I know that's kind of a thing, like a red flag too, like people singling you out and making you feel like you're not like anyone else there.
I'm a rule follower. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not like a, I can drive over the speed limit a little bit and stuff, but when somebody tells me to do something that I respect, then, if everybody else was doing it, it's not like I'm going to go jump off a cliff, because there's a point at which, I did have to stand up and say no more, with Daddy. But there was this sense of, okay, I can read these books and see what it's all about. And I can get a discipler. I long to have somebody to pray with me and to know me. I think people I wanted to be known by somebody, but it just kind of didn't work out the way that it should have, or like you would expect it to. I mean, what I thought was safe became unsafe. Yeah, as we started to get more involved, and especially as they asked me to become a teacher at their school, and the more I found out about that, I started to have great misgivings. And you've just, in your last podcast, Becca, talked some about some of the things, and I know you made light of them, but there were several things that were so dark, and part of that for me, as I'm segueing into this, if that's okay, part of that for me was learning that none of the teachers there, who some were very extraordinary, got paid very much at all. In fact, they were expected to raise families on a pittance, while you looked at the pastor and his wife, who were living this high life. I mean, who had Mercedes Benzes, both of them did, and this is my spot to park in, right at the very, very front, and
they had a gorgeous house.
This is my seat. Well, yeah, Grace, I mean, you and the MCs were expected to keep their yard up and everything. I mean, they didn't have to pay for anything, but yet they used people for free. And so when they approached me, I have to say, most people don't know this, but I went back to get my master's degree and teaching certificate when Grace was just finishing up college. So not college,
yeah, high school.
High school. So you and I graduated. I with my master's, and you from high school at the same time. And have always felt called to teach, and had always been in a role like that. But this became official for me. So I really wanted to teach. And at the time, the district that we were in, I tried to get a job, and there were just no openings then. But I did a lot of subbing, and people loved having me as a sub. But when this pastor's wife approached me and asked me if I would teach full time, and I remember, saying, "Can Becca come? And could that be my pay?" Without really realizing, that was not okay, because the cost for your school was a mere pittance to, what a salary should have been. But then when I got in and realized what the school was paying these other teachers, and how they were living on a thread, and some of these families had 5 and 6 kids. It was shocking. And I was like, how could this possibly be? And then you look at the disparity between, like I said, what the pastor and his wife, how they were living, and yet how they expected everybody else to live. Was different. And one of the biggest ways that was shown, and Becca I know you'll agree with me, was they had a celebration every October called Reformation Day.
Remember
That-
basically we're celebrating the whole Martin Luther nailing the thesis, like the 99 thesis to the door. Reformation Fest, hooray. It was basically Christianized Halloween festivity where we would all dress up in medieval clothes, and there'd be like a competition of all different kinds, like for best costume, for best speech, for best like painting or photography. So the school actually had this as a grading thing. Like we had to participate in at least 3 events and be graded on them.
But I was so shocked. I mean, I had to go out and get a costume, and I just went to the local costume shop and bought a nun costume. But when the principal stepped in with like $1,000 dress on that was like period specific, I mean, we're talking down to the bustle and like with a queen crown on. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh.
The costume is a representation of the power that she held.
Oh my gosh. Well,
it was more than just a costume.
Yes, it was more than just a costume. It was so over the top. I could not believe it. I couldn't believe the amount of money spent.
Yeah, and like if you remember, they had knights in shining armor lining the doors to the school. And I heard one year before my mom and I had gotten there, they had decorated, like they had made the high school basically decorate or also Grace's Bible School program, because they were all part of the same building.
And parents.
And volunteers basically, like anyone that could came in and would decorate the whole church. And one year I heard that they did the entire building, which is 3 floors, and they decorated the sanctuary with like paper mache trees and a river. Like they just went all out. Like actual water, I heard. Like they actually put like a tarp down and made a river run through the sanctuary.
Yeah, it just, everything that they did was just kind of like, where did you get the money for all this?
Yeah.
And so what I wanted, I'm going to bring you back for just a minute, because that, just the dress that she was wearing at Ref Fest, because I was using that as an example, and going overboard with all these decorations and things. Mm-hmm. When you realize the teachers weren't getting paid anything, there was not even any money for curriculum or anything like that. So, I mean, it was this, you had to come up with your own. And I always kept wondering, where in the heck is the money going?
Right.
And then you realize that they were running all these other programs, for people who were outside of high school, and they seemed to be making money too. And of course, people were, I mean, it costs to go to this school. Mm-hmm. I just kept thinking, if people are paying tuition for the school, then why aren't we having any money for any of the programs?
Yeah. No, it wasn't good. And, but yeah, I mean, money was a really big thing. And I think the unfortunate part is, I think, like you said, that became their undoing.
Yes. I was going to say, the money part was really, that was a tweaky part for Dad and I too. But they had a special speaker in one night, and not that his name would mean anything, but I remember him speaking and getting people whipped up into a frenzy. I think it was during one of these times, they had everybody fast. They had whole yes. church fasts. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he just said, whatever money you have in your wallet, just throw it on the floor in defiance of Satan. like God can multiply this like loaves and fishes, and so stick it on the floor and jump on it and leave it there, you know. So who do you think picked up all that money? Daddy and I that night were just like, what the heck is going on? And we didn't put any money on the floor. I remember that, but almost feeling ashamed. Like you wanted to act like maybe you were taking money out of your pocket and putting it on the floor. But it was soon after that, the undoing started happening, and the financial misappropriation started coming out, and eventually the demise of the school first and then the church. So, and it's funny to talk about the financial aspect of it being that undoing, but that was just a small little piece of it, because the manipulation, the control, everything, I think there was a small faction of people that I can think of that had just had enough. And once they started looking into things, because this all started with one of the elders who actually found the truth and really, really struggled with, do I expose this? So thankful for the courage it took them, because they were one of the people who was up on this top tier echelon of people who were venerated, and you know, they were up at the top with the pastor. They chose the truth instead of the lie.
Yeah.
And they chose to expose.
And I was gonna say too, like, I wanted to ask to kind of hear again what the exit process was like for our family. I recall, I mean, I had just finished master's commission. It was a few months after we started sensing some things kind of happening at the church that weren't great. But can you tell me a little bit about like how that all went down, that we ended up leaving?
Well, the year before, when you were in master's commission, we had thought we were going to move. And, you know, it didn't work out then. So we just kept living in that house, and we took on the MC student who was living with us, and we lived that next year and started school again in September. You had gotten out, and this was my then second year starting with the academy, and it was Becca's, I won't give them your year, but you know, it was a significant year in school. So we started off, and by November is when the rumblings were going on. But I mean, we couldn't believe, I mean, when you hear things, I mean, we'd heard little rumblings, but when you hear things, you would think, oh, maybe that's not such a big deal, because we didn't know what it was. But it was very clear by the end of November that, you know, essentially the pastors had siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars for their own personal use. And had really deep sixed the school and any other program, but boy, were they living like kings and queens. And they were ousted. It was a year after we had tried to move again, and this time we put our house up and it sold within 3 days. And we moved within a month. And the aftermath of all those relationships and everything, Daddy and I think the biggest aftermath for us was we couldn't trust anybody from that church. We couldn't trust the people that we'd been with, because once something starts to crumble, then you're realizing, what was that built on? I mean, did you even like me in the first place, or did you just see me as a body to bring money into your machine? And do you realize that you were just as brainwashed as I am? And some people just wanted to close their eyes and bury their head in the sand and just go on like nothing had happened. And so we felt like we needed to just make a fresh break of that. It felt really unsafe for us too. You guys know me, I am a people person, but that time when I became vulnerable and we opened ourselves up to friendships, just pretty much destroyed any kind of trust that I had in allowing people in to my life again. So it's taken quite a bit of time, and there are still ways in which I find myself very guarded, just in not wanting people to know too much, because I just don't want to be manipulated.
And I mean, you obviously know, like Becca and I resonate a lot with that too. And we're still dealing with it pretty regularly, but
right.
It's something that we've all had to go through together. And I think one of the best things about this process and this time is that once it came to an end, we at least had each other and we had all gone through it. We had all seen it. And we were able to do a lot of processing as an immediate family. It was definitely not easy, because I think it's still taken years to see certain things. Things are like, I feel like I get fresh epiphanies every day of like something that I didn't realize happened. We're doing okay today. Like, we aren't perfect, but I think we're doing okay. So before we go today, we just wanted to leave you with some other resources, just in case if you have gone through any of this stuff that we're talking about, or if somebody you know has gone through these things we've talked about. We just feel that this is really important to spend the time and energy on walking through. And so, Bex, give us our first resource. What do we got?
All right, so Grace and I both recommend this, but if you've gone through any traumatic experience or abusive experience in your life, you should definitely go to therapy and or counseling, just because it helps you process through everything that's happened. I know Grace has done therapy, and I personally have done counseling, so we kind of both have different sides on that story, you know? So like for me, it was useful just because I could actually talk freely to somebody about it, and they would listen and ask me questions to help me start thinking more about what I feel through that whole experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I went through therapy a bit longer than you did, but honestly, like, for anybody, I honestly recommend just seeing a therapist at some point in your life, whether or not you're dealing with this, because it could just change your life. I mean, truly.
Yeah, they do say too that even if you've never experienced trauma or anything bad necessarily, it's still good to go because it can help you learn new things about yourself. So.
Exactly. All right, our second resource that we have here, and I think I've mentioned this in a previous podcast, is actually the Allender Center podcasts. You can look them up online just by Googling the Allender Center. And this is a really great resource to just continue to learn more about spiritual abuse. They have a really great series on it. And some really insightful topics. It's done by a psychologist and a theologist, so it's very, very tangible and also very intellectual. It's a really great way to look at this conversation in a different way.
Mm-hmm. They had some really good stories to share there as well.
Yes.
So just branch out. They definitely have more to kind of add on to what we're saying, basically. So just go see what they got to share.
Right.
Another resource is this is just really a tip, but just identify the safe people in your life. You know, you can find a friend or a family member, someone that's willing to actually listen to what you have to say, because sometimes it's hard to find those safe people, especially after a traumatic event, and it might take you some time. But when you do find that person, you know, then that should help you get through some more tough times in your life. I actually wanted to mention too that in a podcast I'd listened to, I can't remember which podcast it was, so I don't remember the name, so I can't name drop it here. But basically there was a woman talking about how she makes a list of people that she feels safe talking to about certain topics. So like there's one list where it's like the energizers, where you can go to these people if you just need to be encouraged or pumped up, and they'll just say super nice things about you, make you feel like you're just on top of the world. There's another list where it's the people that can just slap you in the face when you're just going off the walls. You're just super high anxiety that day, you're overthinking everything. Go to that person and have them be like, get a grip, start thinking more clearly again. And then the third list that they mentioned was the names of people that you just shouldn't share your personal stories with, because they'll be kind of more of the Debbie Downers, or they don't care, or they'll try to make it more about them and not really listen to what you're saying. So that actually should also help you kind of figure out, who is your safe person in a way.
Exactly. And this is something really important to do. And it's hard because if you've gone through any sort of trauma like this, or through spiritual abuse specifically, like we've said before, learning how to trust again and figure out how to trust other people again is really, really hard. But it's definitely something that if you are able to, then look for those people who you can trust and you feel safe with. The next resource and tip that we really suggest for those of you who have been through this is just allow yourself to sit in it, process it if you can, internally. Things like journaling and thinking on it, and even reflecting on it in a way that you're thinking about not only your own perspective in the moment, but starting to think about like the people around you in those situations, and kind of understanding like what was the experience of the other people who are also going through this. And this is actually something really, really hard to do. So for those of you who maybe it's been more fresh, or you worked through it a lot, this is not something that I encourage, especially if this is going to bring up more anxiety.
True.
Anything like that. So
yeah, like if dwelling on it is unhealthy.
So do this at your own comfort level for sure.
Yeah, sort of to add on to that, I know a big thing for me actually after all the stuff we'd gone through was meditation. Just like sometimes I would stay up late at night and just have a candle lit and sit and just breathe, like deep breathing, close my eyes, and then I'd just start thinking about everything, and sometimes just think about nothing, because even clearing your mind is like a really good skill to have.
Yeah, I agree.
And our last bullet right here is that there are some good like paper resources, like there's books you can read, or even blogs that other people have written on the topic of spiritual abuse. I know Grace and I have both found that very helpful, because I remember we did find tons of blogs just hidden away online about the exact places we were at, and it was kind of surreal to see that it's not just us, and it's been going on for a long time. So you never know what you'll find, and it could really help you reach out to more people and just come together and feel stronger together.
Right. And I totally agree. And that was a big part of my process too. And there were blogs and websites written about WTF that have really helped me process, and that also helped me see that I wasn't alone. In my experiences, that there were people out there that had gone before or after and experienced very similar things. And so it's a great way to find those people too. So definitely look for those opportunities. And
Mm-hmm.
thank you, Mom, again for coming to join
Yeah.
the show today. We really appreciated your time and your insight. And maybe we'll have you again sometime. So, and for everybody else, thanks for listening. And hopefully you'll join us again for a fresh episode next week.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Catch us later.